Alright, good afternoon everyone. Welcome back. Alright, so let's just get right into it. Today, what we're working on is everything road and track related. So we're going to be doing our little roadway through the center of our diorama here. We're going to do everyone's favorite stage of doing their layout, which is ballast. Yay! Everyone loves ballast. And then we're going to be doing a little bit of detailing on it to just really liven it up. So this should actually be a little bit of a quicker workshop, but hopefully you'll learn some stuff anyway. So let's start with our road here. So there are lots of different ways to do roads, obviously, because there's lots of different styles of roads. The first and most ancient and most basic is your dirt road. Obviously anywhere, if you're doing a pre-1890s layout, that's pretty much all you're going to be dealing with. And obviously, even if you are doing a more modern layout, there's plenty of rural routes and crossings and all that sort of stuff. And that is definitely the easiest sort of road to do, because basically all you need to do is, if you remember back to our dirt workshop, the very first one, might have been the second one actually, we did this sort of coating of dirt. All you have to do is lay that down and skip the little, fragments here, because it's a surface. You still want it to be smooth. And then there's one short additional step to really make it look more realistic, because when you've got a road surface that's being used, it's going to end up being a little bit pounded down and a little bit lighter than the typical road dirt surface would be. So what we're going to do, this is, if you remember back to our dirt clinic, this is the same grout we were using, the biscuit color, to lighten up the dirt. We can also use this as a highlight to make our paved area look a little bit lighter. So this is what's going to happen here. There's going to be a little building here, and we're going to have a sort of little parking area out front made out of dirt. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take my cheap little paintbrush here. I'm going to dip it right into the grout. I'm going to just brush it right on. This brush is a little bit stiff, but you don't need much because it's pretty strong. But you can already see that lightens it up a couple tones. I'm basically going to do this little square here. I'm going to come up to the road. You can see I already pre-laid this road just so I can do all the stages today. And you might want to do a different tone of grout depending on what area you're modeling. If you're doing somewhere that's got a lot of red dirt, you might want to go for a more reddish colored grout. And then just spread it out, make sure you don't have any too high spots. And that's going to go. I'm going to say that most people are driving onto the site from here, so I'm actually going to come right up to the edge here and go a little bit onto the road. Sort of show where cars have been moving from one surface to the other and dragging dirt along with them. And obviously this is a lot more informal than sort of a state maintained route, so you can make your edges fuzzy, make it patchy, and that's just going to add a little bit more character to it. You want to avoid streaks, because that's not quite as realistic, but patch. A little bit of patchiness is alright. There we go. The edge there. Work in circles, again, kind of work out those brush marks. And there you can already see in about a minute and a half how something that looks pretty much like a dirt road, like a little dirt parking lot, especially once we start adding the edge details like grasses and bushes and put our building on top and all that stuff. And it's a little bit nice contrast to our surface from the rest of the dirt. And then when we're done, we can just seal this with either matte varnish, or we can use the same scenic cement that we use everywhere else, but this does tend to stick pretty well by itself once you brush it in. There we go. Just simple as that. So there's your dirt road. The only other thing you might want to do is, if you're actually doing a dirt road and not just a parking lot, put a little bit more emphasis on where the wheels will go, where the dirt's pounded a little bit flatter. So let's say you got some cars that they're coming in like this, you want to sort of imagine where the wheels are coming in, brush that in. Other than that, it's pretty simple. And So obviously that's the easiest version. Now for paved surfaces, there's lots and lots and lots of different ways to do that, especially depending on whether you're using asphalt or concrete. Concrete, the easiest way I've seen it done is actually styrene. You can just cut however long you want. They make styrene sheets 2 or 3 feet long, this wide, and you just cut your joints into it and paint it your dull gray, and you weather it just like you would any other model and stick it in place. And that ends up looking a lot better than any sort of grout product, just because concrete, no matter how old it is, tends to be a lot smoother than asphalt. And it also has a bit of a warm color, where that's a little bit easier to achieve with paint than any sort of grout product or plaster product. Now with paved asphalt roads, which is what we're doing today, there's a couple different methods. You could also do the styrene method and just paint it a different color. That's fine. I think that's what a lot of this layout is actually. Either that or use what most people use is the Woodland Scenics Smooth It plaster, which if you're familiar with it, it's basically the plaster of Paris with you just smooth it out just like you would like a concrete, and then you stain it whatever color you want, and that looks pretty good. You can also use Dave's preferred method, especially if it's in the background, is they make a textured spray paint, which has got sort of a speckling to it. It's got like a stone texture, and you literally just mask out wherever the route is, spray your road, and you're done. I'm going to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of how that looks up close. Nothing against you, Dave. But if you're in a hurry and you got like a road that's like weaving through a mountain or something, you're not going to see it super up close. That's an easy way to do it. Just take your texture spray paint. Done. Done in 5 minutes. The method I'm going to be showing off today is using tile grout, the exact same stuff that this is, just a different color. The color you choose is going to be a little bit dependent on what side of road you're modeling. Asphalt obviously starts out a pretty dark black color, but then it gets lighter as it ages and isn't replaced. If anything, I've gone a little bit too light here, but we can sort of mitigate that, and I'll show you how to do that a little bit later. But this is just silver colored sanded tile grout. The same stuff I have over here. The main advantage of this there's a couple advantages over plaster. One is that the texture is a little bit closer to what you would expect a paved road to be. It's got a little bit of a natural grittiness to it. And two, you don't have to paint it or anything. It already comes the color. You can get a color darker than this and get pretty close to your natural asphalt color without having to worry about painting and paint streaks and anything that comes with that. We're going to do a little bit of painting on this, which I'll show in a bit with the airbrush, but just the natural base color is pretty close. And then also it doesn't crack. It's obviously designed for bathroom tile, which flexes a little bit. So this doesn't crack as much as plaster might. It can still crack if you're not careful with it, and I'll go over the proper method to prepare it so that it doesn't do that. But it tends to be a little bit easier to work with than plaster. The disadvantage with it is that you do need to do a little bit of prep work of masking everything off, and it's a little bit sticky. If you get it onto something where it's not supposed to, it's not coming off. So you better be able to cover it up or do something with it to make sure that it doesn't get to where you don't want it to. So we're going to be doing some masking with this as well. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Before we get started with the road, though, obviously we're dealing with railroads here. So anywhere we have a road, there's a good chance you're going to have a railroad crossing. And there's just as many variations of railroad crossings as there are road styles, if not more. The simplest you can possibly do is literally just asphalt goes right over the tracks, and they cut the flangeways with driving a locomotive over it. I've seen video of it. They do it. That's if you got like a branch line. Yeah, up in the Bay Coast. Yeah. If you're on a railroad that gets like 2 trains a week, that's perfectly fine. But if you're doing a main line, you're going to need some sort of guarding to make sure that both the road surface and the trains and the rails don't get too banged up. The classic way to do this and what we're going to model is just wood planking. Was it you that posted on Facebook the method that's got the for the asphalt in between the 2 pieces of wood? It might have been you, it might have been someone else, but there's a couple different ways this is done. If you look in Rapidan, there's just the couple pieces of wood up against the road side of the rail, a couple against each flange, and then they just put asphalt in between which is kind of a compromise between the just dumping straight asphalt in. What we're going to do obviously is just the full planking all the way across. You can also do concrete, which in that case, the probably easiest way to do that is that Walters makes just a pre-made kit. You just glue it right in place. And then same for rubber or steel plates, which is the more modern way to do it, especially on main lines and heavy highways and like light rail lines and things like that. And again, all that is easy to do with just a kit. They make kits for this as well. I was actually going to use a kit for this, but I put it off, and they did not have any at Dale's or Hobbytown. So all this is just typical basswood, 16th inch square. I measured it out to the width of the road, cut it off. We're not going to stain this right now, but what you would do ideally if you had time is you would cut your plank lines into the wood about every 30 feet scale, which is about 3 inches. Alternate them, so if you have one line here, you have the next one here, so there's no lined up joints. And then you just drop it into place. And we'll take our car to make sure we don't interrupt the flanges at all. And then quick and easy, we're just going to line it up. We're just going to super glue this right in place.
Hey, Cutter, can I mention for planks also another easy way? If Prisma makes kind of oil pencils, anyway, you can get it in dark brown, sharpen it, and then you can just draw the plank lines on it and then stain it.
Yeah.
That looks pretty good, depending on how much close you are in detail. But
Yeah, I'm going a little bit more detail on it because obviously this is a diorama, so this is meant to be seen up close. So this is going to be more detailed. But again, like I was saying, you've got a piece of road that's like 3 feet back from the aisle. No one's going to see it super easily. All right, so that was just liquid super glue. I'm going to drop it into place, and then before it sets up, I'm going to run a truck over it to make sure I'm not bumping any flanges or anything. That's just like that. And what I should have done, and what I'm going to do on this side, is put the running guards in before you start putting in the pavement. I just forgot. But it's not that big. This is a learning. One of the things you learn doing scenery, no matter how well you plan, there's going to be some point where you need to go back and fix something. This happened in this one. So what I should have done before I even got started with these roads is you can see where I've got the foam glued in on top of the existing surface. What I should have done is plan for the road grade from the beginning before I even put dirt down, build the road slope into the foam, and then put all the dirt and plaster on top of that so that it's already smooth to begin with. But you can see it's not that big of a deal to fix it after the fact. All I have to do is pave back over this, and then I'm going to go back before the next clinic, go back with the sculpt mold, blend in this grade here, and put more dirt on top of it. It's really not that big of a deal. I'm going to do the same thing with our little running board here. Just line it up. And with this side, obviously the wheels are going to be clear unless you've got some sort of weird truck configuration, so I'm just going
to... You just butt that up against the rail?
Yep, exactly. Put super glue on each. Ideally, you might also want to just take an X-Acto knife and cut off all the tie plates.
Yep.
But you don't really have to if you're in a hurry like that.
That was done back at Phoebus by someone, a lot of it. And we had to come in one night with a razor knife and fix that.
Easier way is to cut the back of the wood.
Put an angle on it. It was catching.
Angle off the edge of the wood so it clears the ties. Gotta clear the tie plates and spikes.
All right, there we go. And then only other thing you have to do is either after you put it on or before you put it on is stain this. Either you can use a normal typical wood stain, but that tends to be a little bit overkill for plaster. Easiest way is just to take again one of these acrylic inks, a black or a brown, and soak it for a little bit just to give it a little bit of an aged look. But you can also do that after some place. All right, but now you can see that out of the way. A little crossing guard. There's going to be another one on this side, but this is just so I have something to work up to. Okay, so now before we get started on our road, we have to know how wide we want it. So you can see on this board here, I've gone through, checked all the different civil engineering guides and standards and all that, and just gone through a little bit of my experiences working with buildings. And and given a whole list of typical dimensions for different road elements. Some of which are a little bit surprising if you don't think about it. So you just see here, typical sidewalk. This varies, but minimum they're usually 5 feet, 5 to 10 feet. You can see you have O scale, HO scale, and N scale. So in O scale, you're going to be 1.25 wide for 5 feet. HO scale, you're going to be 11/16, which is a little bit shy of 3/4 of an inch, and then N scale, you're going in 3/8. The problem with working with all these numbers is that O scale and N scale are nice round numbers. O scale is just 1/4 inch scale, and N scale, it's a weird number, but at least it's an even number. HO scale is a weird prime number. So nothing, no matter what you do, you're never going to get an even number. So as long as you get close enough with these numbers and do some rounding, it'll be fine. So I'm just going to focus on the HO scale column now. So typical parking space, like in any sort of parking lot, is 9 foot by 18 feet wide and deep. So that's 1.25 inches by 2.5. Driving lane varies depending on the traffic of the road, but interstate highway standard is 12 feet. Roller routes can get down as low as like 11, but that's going to be per lane about 1 5/8 inches per lane. A full right-of-way varies depending on between 24 and 30, depending on if they have gutters or bike lanes or anything like that. 30 feet is what we typically see on like an urban route when we're doing our architectural plans that we have to keep clear for the right-of-way. So that's going to be anywhere between 3 3/8 inches for, which is what this is for a 2-lane rural route with no shoulders or bike lanes or anything like that. Anyway, up to over 4 inches. Shoulders on an interstate highway. The left side is 4 feet, right side is 10 feet, which is anywhere between 9/16 and 1 3/8 inches. And here's the surprising one that isn't super intuitive. Stripe width is 6 inches, which is close enough to a 1/16 of an inch. And then the road dashes on a highway. I saw a study that when most people are polled, they think the dashed lines on the interstate highway are about 2 feet long. They're actually 10 feet, which is
That's my faster one.
Yeah, and you're also looking at it at an angle. And then the gap in between each line is 30 feet. The gap between the stop bar on a railroad crossing and the first rail is also 30 feet, which is 4 inches. So something like that, which is it's almost to the edge here. I'm going to be going more like 24 feet just to compress it a little bit. Generally, when it comes to dimensioning the roads, especially when it comes to lengths, you have to go a bit further than you think you might if you want to be perfectly to scale. So how I've modeled this, again, this is kind of a roll route with no shoulders, so
Can I just toss in too, another thing to consider, depending on your era, is the colors and the stripings that they use.
yes, they will be different. In fact, if you're doing, I think it's before the 50s, it's actually 15-foot stripes. And then I don't think they used yellow before like the 60s, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was all white stripes. So make sure to go on, if you're modeling a particular era that's not modern times, do your research and determine what the sort of striping was. Another thing I'm going to get into on a later workshop when we do detailing is I was looking up guardrails, which are done very differently, if at all, from between the 40s and today. And this is going to be sort of a 50s transition era module. So,
or the region, too.
yep, that too. Yeah, some people are a lot more careful. Some states are a lot more careful with how they maintain their highways than others. And they have different variations on signage and that sort of thing.
Railroads don't necessarily have center lanes.
That's right. I'm going to have one on this one, modern style, just to demonstrate. Even if it's going to be a little bit anachronistic, but most people are nowadays are modeling like 70s and later. So, and then we're also going to have the shoulder stripes, which is a little bit overkill for this kind of road, but again, demonstration. Okay, so as you can see, I've set this up for the minimum width here, which is 24 feet. So that's 3 3/8 inches. Again, it's your model railroad. So if you think it would look better as like 3 inches or so, you can do that. Just whatever you think looks good. But if you want to be accurate, you want to be about 3 3/8 inches. Make sure I'm in frame here. Yep. Okay. So now we're finally going to get into pouring. We're grouting rather. We're not pouring anything. So this is super simple. So always check your particular brand of grout before you start mixing. But for this particular, this is Mapes, I believe. It's 2 to 1, 2 parts grout to 1 part water. So I'm just going to measure out about a cupful of grout here. And then just get half a cup full of water. And this is one that, unlike our epoxy clinic last month, this isn't nearly as ratio critical. So as long as you get roughly the right consistency, it'll be good. You do still have to mix it quite a bit. So this is going to be about 2 to 3 minutes of mixing just to make sure we're well incorporated here. But it's not nearly as dire and has a lot more longer working time than epoxy does. I'm going to start mixing. Make sure you scrape off all the edges. Going to mix for about 3 to 5 minutes, probably closer to 3 with such as the 5 minutes is if you're what the directions recommend if you're doing a full 25-pound bag, which we're not. So 3 minutes is probably fine just to make sure. This is about the consistency we want, kind of like a pancake batter. And you can tell it's starting to activate because you can see the bubbles there. That's the sort of lime and calcium in the grout activating. And you want to make sure that you're nice and well mixed because if it's not, or if you have your mixture too thin, one thing that can happen is that you pour and then the bubbles go off while it's setting. And so you end up with a really bubbly, lumpy surface that doesn't actually harden properly. It just kind of gets all gritty, and when you try to sand it down, it just falls apart. Which isn't the end of the world. It happened over in Rapidan. I just had to cover it up again. or it, if you're doing, might work if you're doing a really, really old, dilapidated parking lot. You might want that more gritty, torn up texture, but you're going to do a little bit of sanding because it doesn't look like potholes, it looks like bubbles. Now, before we start, I'm going to mask off all the critical parts, because again, if you get this on anything, it ain't coming off. So if you can't paint over it, make sure it's masked. Again, if I had done this properly, this would have already been sort of blended into the shoulder. But that's actually okay for now because that gives me kind of an edge to work on. There we go. And there is a product that Woodland Scenic sells for their Smooth It line of roads. It's like a thick foam tape. I don't like it though, because I believe the actual, like, Woodland Scenic, a lot of their products is just repackaging of other products for scenic use. And in that case, I believe that's some sort of, what I've heard is that it's like a carpeting tape, and it's designed to not come up ever. And so when you try to pull it up, when you put down your roads, it tends to just tear and stick, and you have to go through with like a plaster knife and X-Acto knife and scrape it all up, and it's just a pain in the butt. So I just don't even deal with that.
It's not that thick either.
It's thick enough. You really for this application, you really don't want to go more than a 1/16 of an inch thick. If you go like an 1/8 of an inch or so, what happens is, so obviously this is tile grout. It's meant to have pretty thin applications. If you go thicker than that, when it dries, it shrinks, and then you get cracking. So you kind of want a thick enough application that you can sand it down without tearing through, wearing through, and exposing your base layer, but you don't want it much thicker than that. Okay, so now we're all masked off. All right, looks like we're good to go here. All the bubbles have sort of settled down. You can see the thickness there. It's still kind of got a little bit of a watery consistency, but it's thick enough to stick to our mixing stick without much trouble there. So that's pretty much perfect. All you gotta do, if you've ever laid tile, you already know what to do here, but we're just gonna put a little bit on our putty knife here and start scraping it on.
Did you put that on with paintbrush?
If you want to, once.
Yeah, you're not gonna use rubber.
But I find the putty knife is actually a little easier for getting a smooth, level surface, which I'm not sure how you would do with a paintbrush. You could try, but your mileage may vary.
So about how thick are you putting it on?
About a 1/16 of an inch at the most. Like I said, just enough that when you hardens up, you're not going to get it perfectly smooth, your first try. So you're gonna have to go back and do sanding, which I'm gonna demonstrate on the other half. But you want it thick enough that you can sand without tearing through to the base layer, because then you have to obviously do it again. But you don't want it more than that, because like I said, this will shrink as it dries, and then you'll get cracking. So you want to try to get it as thin as you possibly can. So I'm going to work right up to the edge of our grade crossing here. I'm going to try to make a smooth, level transition between the grade crossing and the road. One thing that I never really noticed before looking at this layout, but seems to be a common theme, is that you always want your road surfaces to be either working up to the grade crossing or level with it. There are a couple spots on this layout where the road grades down to the grade crossing, and there's actually a little bit of a lip right at the edge here where there's a bump, basically like a speed bump. In most cases, it doesn't cause back that big of a deal, but there's some edge cases where specifically Jeeps, GP locomotives, they have these little suspension hangers off the sides of the trucks that stick out from the typical truck width a little bit, and they're pretty low. So what happens is, you'll see if you want to try it out. It's in the naval yard. That if they run up to these grade crossings and the road's a little bit high, they'll actually bump the suspension hangers, the spring hangers on those trucks, and if not cause some interrupts, it might actually derail the train. So try to make sure, again, that your roads are either sloping down away from or level with the grade crossing. All right, and we're looking pretty good right now. We're not going to get it perfectly smooth, just because obviously our putty knife is going to leave some marks. But I'm going to just put one more thin coat on there, and that's going to do it.
How long does this take to set?
Overnight. At least, I would say at least 8 hours, but for safety, overnight.
Always let things dry overnight.
Yeah. And if you go a little bit over with your masking, especially with asphalt roads, that's fine, because a lot of them have, not all of them, but a lot of them have a gravel shoulder that you can cover it up with. Or you can just, when you're doing your grasses and ground cover, you just cover it up. Okay, that's basically it. You can see this is kind of an exception. So what we were talking about when we were doing the dirt is that when it gets, you want to buy a shade or two lighter than you think you need, because it darkens when you glue. Grout doesn't do that. You can see it got a lot darker, but it'll lighten back up to this once it cures. So when you buy it, make sure you get the actual color that you want at the end, because that's the color it's going to be.
No, it's silver, right?
This is silver. In my opinion, this is actually a little bit on the light side, so if you can find a shade or two darker, I would. This is just all that Lowe's had when I looked. You might want to check Home Depot, though. They tend to have a better selection of a lot of stuff. All right. So, now once you've let it sit overnight, if you want a really rough, like urban road, you're actually might be able to skip this step, or at least go a little bit lighter with the sanding. But there are a couple spots where we've got like the ridges here and some bumps that we want to sand down. So I'm just going to take, this is a 120 grit sanding block, and you want to be, grout's pretty hard, so you want to be a little bit aggressive with it, but not too aggressive, or you'll work through, like I said. But you just want to smooth that surface off. Thank you. We'll work out all the large bumps. And you can kind of see I was a little bit thin there, but there we go. And the newer your road is, the more sanding you want to do. In that case, you might want a little bit more of a base layer to mitigate that, but there we go. All right. Brush that off. Yeah, unfortunately I did work through there, but mistakes are made. You can always go back and patch it. Or you can just paint it, which might be what I end up doing. Okay, but now we've cleaned it up a little bit. Now we're ready for striping. So we're gonna go back, get some more masking tape. So like I said, Road stripes about 4 to 6 inches, which an inch of scale is close enough to a 16th of an inch. I'm going to use just normal painter's tape because we're just doing a straight line here, so we don't have to worry about curves. If you are working with a curve, you're going to want to get like the lining tape that you get, I believe Tamiya makes for like painting racing stripes and stripes on airplane models. Before I
The stripes here on the road were done with pinstriping.
Yeah, that I've noticed that's kind of
Works pretty good.
I've noticed it's coming up though. So
Because you got to glue it underneath.
yeah, I like to make it look like it's been painted onto the surface.
Yeah.
So I've got my scale ruler here, so I'm gonna go, like I said, 12 foot wide. Let's see, right up there. That's the center of our road, so I'm going to go over a little bit. Press it down. And then about a 16th of an inch wide. See that? Right, great. So now we're going to take our colored pencil. I'm going to go with the golden yellow here. Again, check your history. Make sure you're using the right color and right patterns. And then super simple, all I got to do, color right over. You can be kind of messy with it. What this does is it has like a painted on look. It also, it's not perfect, so it kind of looks like a little bit aged right out of the box. And the fresher you want it to be, the heavier you go with the pencil. So I want this to kind of be like a medium age. So I'm just gonna go enough that I have a solid color.
What kind of pencils are those?
Just Crayola colored pencils. I bought them over there. I've used artist colored pencils too, but these seems to be working just as well. So save yourself a little bit of money. All right. And now I'm gonna pull this up. There we go.
And what happens if you want a double stripe?
All you do is you just find where it's gonna go.
Well, once the pencil's down, it won't come up. It won't.
You do need to go back and when you're done, you need to seal it with either matte varnish, acrylic spray varnish, or scenic glue.
Okay.
There we go. You can see that looks like a nice old faded lane divider right there. Like it's been sitting there for a few years. All right, so now one last step to get this looking good is roads. They don't, if they're used well, what tends to happen is that where the tires go is a little bit lighter color, and then the edges, the center, and the very center are all darker because they haven't been worn down as much. So this is where we're going to break out the airbrush for the first time. So I need to turn this up. If you don't have an airbrush, you can use pastels, weathering powders, and you'll get a very similar effect. This is just a little bit easier to get a smooth color. So I'm gonna, this is black airbrush. It's pretty thin for a base coat, but I'm going to add a little bit of airbrush thinner just so we get a very thin mix. So first I'm going to hit the, I'm going to clean off the surface a little bit with some air. And then I'm just going to first hit the edges of the road here.
That's double action brush.
Yes. This is a pash, however you say it.
What sort of pressure are you going with that?
About 15 to 20. And just very lightly. And then one more.
you right through the one-to-one of the paint to the center.
Yep. Right there. Now if you come up and take a look, you can see that's looking pretty good. So we've got our wear marks where the tires would go, and then a little bit darker again in between the tires and the center of the road and on the margins here.
Where's the patches, the tar patches?
Yep, we can just do that too. So all you need to do for
The
that.
black snakes?
Yep. Tire snakes, all you need to do is take a thin tip Sharpie. That'll do it.
Yeah.
But like you were saying, let's say, I want to say here.
What was the question on it?
Tire patches or tar patches and tar snakes. So let's say I want a patch
More
here.
popular in the little roads
Well, in that case, 64 must be a rural road then. All right, you can see I've basically just masked out a square there, and I'm just gonna. There you go. Look at that. Nice little tar patch.
Don't work for beat out.
Where's the beat up man? Black and yellow.
You're doing all right, you need potholes.
And in
not
fact, you
patches.
know what? That's actually
All the potholes.
that's actually a good excuse to patch up this
Dirt roads.
this pink spot here.
If that's VDOT, you need 6 trucks and 8 cars.
One working.
One shovel.
Yeah, so you can see another little nice thing with scenery. You can turn mistakes into opportunities. So now I've got a spot here. And I can actually turn from a bald patch into a detail. Of course, like I said, VTOT ain't perfect, so you can be pretty messy with it.
And then your patch would be actually really black.
Yep. There we go. Alright, pretty simple. And then you can see I've actually got 2 different colors here, which actually works, because now it looks like this is a newer patch and this is one they put down a little bit earlier. Alright, well there we go. So that's all of our paved roads. No, actually we're going to do the next step already, which is we're going to do ballast. Everyone's favorite. It's very easy, but it's very tedious. So, especially if you've got a whole railroad to do. Luckily, I've only got about 3 inches.
That's what she said.
So obviously this is just our typical Woodland Scenics ballast. There is one disadvantage. Everyone uses it. It's perfectly fine. There is one disadvantage I've seen. Is that this actually isn't stone. What this actually is, this is ground up walnut shells that they've painted, which usually isn't a problem. And you know, it's like environmental or
Arizona
something like that.
mining has,
I was about to get into that. The problem is that since it's walnut shells, if you oversaturate it with glue, it floats. So you gotta be careful with that. Like you said, Arizona mining actually does make a ballast that is actual ground up stone. So if you're a stickler for accuracy and you don't want to deal with this floating, go with the Arizona mining stuff. But the wooden scenic stuff is just fine. So all you gotta do, just take a little bit. This is actually more than enough. Put it right down the center of your rails, and then just with your finger. You can use a brush, but I found that your finger is actually a little bit better at sussing it out over the top of the ties. And then brushing it in. Oh, one thing I did forget to mention. So this is just typical Code 100 rail. One thing I did do before, I glued it down with this the Project, the liquid nails, same stuff I used to glue the foam down. The only thing I did is that I went over the whole thing with brown spray paint. You can see that's why the side of the rails is brown now, just to give it a more natural sort of weathered look. And then I went, while it was still curing, took a block of wood and ran it over the top of the rails to get the paint off of that. Took about 5 minutes. So I need a little bit more. One thing you can also do with it, if you're a stickler for detail, like this guy over here, if you're doing if you want to model places where they've been replacing ties, which Chris has modeled before, go through and paint individual ties with either a whitewash or a dark wash. The whitewash being the really old ties, the black wash being the new ones.
Yes.
So you can sort of have a appearance of them replacing individual ties after they've laid the line.
The new creosote ties would have a dark black look. As they age, they go into the brown that everybody realizes, and then they turn into a whitish gray. And then they start deteriorating quickly.
Alright, you can see what I've done here. Just done my best to brush all the rocks off the top of the ties. You're not going to get them all, but once it's dried up, you can go back and hit it again with your fingers or a needle, or a pen rather. And then we're just gonna, do the same thing along the sides here. Go for a little bit less than you think you need, and then add more later. Whoops. I'm going to add some to the slopes here. If you're dealing with a heavy slope, I'm not doing on this part because I don't really have a heavy slope, but if you got a heavy slope where if you just put the ballast down, it would slide off, just put some white glue on the slope before you put it on, and they'll stick right on.
What consistency is that? Medium,
Just normal white glue.
small? No.
Oh, this is a mix of fine and medium. This side is just fine. This is a mix of fine and medium. Generally, again, rule of thumb, but it's really more a matter of personal taste than anything else, is just medium for main lines, and then like a mix of medium and fine for like sidings and branch lines, and then like fine or even no ballast for sidings and spurs. There are spurs that are just dirt, and especially if you're doing like a logging layout where they didn't even have ballast, they just laid the ties right on the dirt because they were going to pull the tracks up in 3 years anyway. Who cares?
Or older ones also cinders,
Yes.
especially
Yeah.
8 yard.
Yeah, especially steam era. Yep. And one thing I did forget to mention. So the color of your ballast is going to be dependent on your region, because generally railroads tend to just locally source their ballast from whatever quarry is nearest to their site. Especially back in the old days when there was more than 5. So generally, if you've got some sort of exposed rock, try to match that. You can get a little bit of variation because obviously they'd be willing to move it a few 100 miles if they had to. But so if you've got like gray rocks, try to use gray rocks. If you've got more black or red, try to match that as best you can. All right, so we got our ballast in. You can see I've brushed as much of the rocks off the top of the track as I can, off the top of the ties. And now we're going to go with the quintessential method of gluing pretty much everything down in our modules from now on. We're going to be using this method. So,
yeah. Real quick, on the side of the top, the rail where the flange is going, do you make a scrape it out, or do you wait until you've glued it and then make the trough? Or is what you're doing enough to...
This should be enough that you might want to, especially code 100 is usually tall enough that it's going to clear it. One thing, if you're not sure, you can just take a spare truck or a car and roll it over. You can see that's running smoothly. But again, you can go through afterwards with a dental pick or a pin or fingers and scrape out the excess if we're having trouble. That is one thing we went way overboard with the Thornburg spur on purpose to make it look a little bit more aged, but there are a couple spots on there where it's getting into the flanges. So that's a case where for operational, it's realistic because there are a lot of spurs where they're just absolutely crap to run on, but we don't really want that on our model railroad. We want to have fun. So that is a place where we probably want to go back and clear out this flange just a little bit. Just make it a little bit more smooth on the cars. All right, so this is what we're about to do. Pay attention because this is what we're going to be using for pretty much every single step from now on. So first, isopropyl alcohol. Doesn't really matter the percentage. 70, 91, both work perfectly fine. And so we're going to apply this to all of our ballast first with an eyedropper. This is going to act as a surfactant. It's going to break the surface tension of the glue and make sure it flows between all the grains and doesn't puddle on top in beads. Another thing you can do to do that is when you're mixing your scenic glue. So your scenic glue is generally 1 part glue to 3 parts water. And if you want to improve your flow of that, you just put in a couple drops of dish soap. That will also help break. I usually do both. So I will do this isopropyl alcohol step, and I will also mix soap into my glue just to make sure it flows as well as I can possibly get it. We want to make sure this is nice and soaked without flooding it, because again, if you flood it, the grains are going to float up. And even if you're using the rock stuff, they might still float up from the surface tension. All right, there we are.
One thing in my experience, having ballasted a lot, is that I actually break it up in steps. I'll do the center section for a couple of feet.
Yep.
And glue it down, and then go away, and then come back the next day and do the sides on either side.
Yeah, that helps kind of break up the tedium because, like I said, this is kind of the most dreaded job.
Yeah.
Especially if you're doing a layout like this and you've got 14 scale miles of main line to glue down. But you can see now, just going with our scenic glue again. 3 parts glue, 3 parts water, 1 part glue, and then a couple drops of dish soap.
We got some of that upstairs. 4 parts glue, no water.
Sometimes you do want to actually make it a little bit thicker. If you're, for some applications, like if you're gluing it down on a slope, you might want it a little bit thicker. But generally 3 to 1 is a good ratio. Now I'm just going through and just soaking all of, and you can see instead of beating up, it beats up for a second, but then it just soaks right in. And you can see it's staining our dirt a little bit, but because we already glued that down, it's not going to get any darker. Once it dries, it's going to go back to the color that it was. And if you do have an area that wasn't glued down right and it gets a little darker, you can just patch it with more dirt. And by the way, one more thing, again, ballast is going to look a little bit different as far as layout goes, depending on what it is. So you can see I've gone for sort of a mainline look here, where it's all the rails and then both sides on either side of the roadbed. If you're doing a branch line, it might only be, or a spur, it might only be up to like a little bit past the edge of the ties. So look at a lot of reference photographs, see what your prototype does, and then make your decisions based on that. All right, and so we're almost done. The only thing we have left to do is we can do the same thing that we did here and just add a little bit of detailing to our ballast here to make it a little bit more realistic. So first thing I want to do, make sure I still have paint here. Since this is, I'm going for like a transition steam air layout or module here. Obviously train's going to drop a lot of soot, a lot of cinders in between the rails here. So I'm going to do, and even if you're doing diesel, you're going to leave a little bit of like grease and oil and stuff. Not as much, but a little bit. So I'm going to do the exact same thing I did here and just leave a little streak of black right in between the rails here to make it look like there's been steam trains passing. And it's also good if you've got a tunnel, do this on top of the portal. Make it look, because even steam air, or diesel air, they're leaving a lot of soot out of their exhaust. So pretty light applications. But there you can see there, just a little black streak. And now I'm gonna change colors here. I'm not gonna bother cleaning out the needle just yet because it's pretty solid color change what we're doing.
In the layout, you're gonna see Doug Coleman did a nice job on the helix by the farmhouse. It's tan going up, and then it's dark coming down to simulate sand being dropped from coming down and
Yep.
then breaking. Going down. You did a nice job.
So now I'm going back with rust color. Again, a couple drops. And then a little bit of the thinner, about 50-50 mix.
Precisely measured.
Very precise, yeah. I'm being very scientific about this. But if you get this wrong, the module will literally explode. So make sure you're very precise. Nitroglycerin. Right.
Insert horrible explosion graphics here.
All right. So now with this, I'm gonna go over the tops of the rails. And this is going to simulate, I'm going to brush the top of the rails afterwards, but this is, when the rails have been sitting in place for a while, the rust tends to soak out of the rails and onto the ballast a little bit. I want to hit either side with that rust color. On the inside too. Obviously, you might not want to do this if you're doing 14 miles of main line, but this is just a little detail. There we go. I'm just gonna, while it's still wet. All right, there we go. Now if you come up and look, you can see how much more realistic that looks with the sort of soot track down the middle of the ties there. And then rust leaking out from the rails on either side. It really helps sort of bring out the realism in that. Just a little extra step. Again, optional, but helps really sort of bring it all together. And that is it. That is roads, ballast, and rails.
And another one, if you want to do, if you're going to have a place where your engines are going to be sitting a while, put a lot of black around it.
Like oil spill
Oil,
and ash pans dumping and.
Oil.
All right. Any questions?
Very good.
Awesome. Thank you very much, guys.